Ever watched your marriage die in slow motion, while everyone else kept laughing and sipping wine? On the night of my birthday, I discovered my wife's secret in the most humiliating way possible. But instead of screaming, I decided to take back my life piece by piece. And when the truth finally surfaced, I made sure everyone knew exactly who'd been betraying whom. Started the evening I turned 38. I remember because Jenna made a big deal about it, telling everyone that birthdays deserved a little spectacle. So I let her plan the backyard party. She said it would be simple. A few friends, some music, good food. Nothing fancy. I believed her because back then I still trusted almost everything she said. By sunset, our yard was crowded. Neighbors, co-workers, a couple of her friends from the library. People I mostly liked enough to wave at when we ran into them at the grocery store. I was standing by the grill, flipping steaks and trying to listen to 3 conversations at once, when I noticed she wasn't around. I didn't think much of it at first. She was always the type to drift between groups, making sure everyone felt welcome. I figured she was inside checking on the dessert. Then the Bluetooth speaker switched to an old Otis Redding track. Our wedding song. Without really deciding to, I set down the tongs and started looking for her. She was at the far edge of the yard, near the fence line where the lights didn't reach as well. Talking to Kurt. He was easy to spot. Tall, sure of himself, always smiling like he'd already won something. The same Kurt who'd shown up at 2 or 3 gatherings before this one. The same Kurt she'd told me was just an old friend. At first, it looked harmless enough. She was holding a glass of wine, nodding while he talked. But then she laughed, tipping her head back. Not the polite laugh you offer out of obligation. The real kind. The kind she used to have for me. I waited to see if she'd look around and catch my eye. She didn't. I walked over, telling myself it was nothing, that if I just stepped in, she'd remember where she belonged. Before I reached them, someone clapped me on the shoulder and started asking about the landscaping business. I answered automatically, glancing past him every few seconds, hoping she'd move away from Kurt. But she didn't. They kept talking like they were alone. Minutes later, when I finally broke free of small talk, I tried again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I stepped up beside her and offered my hand. "Come dance with me," I said. I kept my voice quiet, so no one else would hear if she turned me down. She looked at my hand, then at me. For half a second, I thought she might smile the way she used to, like I was all she needed. Instead, she gave a soft laugh, the kind that felt more like dismissal than amusement. "You should mingle," she said. "You're the host, Tom." I knew that tone. She used it when she wanted to end a conversation without looking unkind. She didn't take my hand. She didn't even step closer. She turned back to Kurt, lifted her glass, and asked him something I couldn't hear. He leaned in, his voice low. She laughed again, softer this time, but more intimate. I stood there with my hand still halfway out, feeling ridiculous. The song kept playing. People around us kept drinking, talking, living their lives. I was the only one who seemed to notice the air changing. When I finally walked away, I didn't go far. Just enough that I could still see them. I cracked open a beer and held it without drinking. My mind kept replaying that moment over and over. How easily she'd turned me away. How natural it looked for her to be with him. Later, after most of the guests had left, she acted like nothing happened. She thanked everyone for coming, hugged neighbors goodbye, and started clearing dishes. I helped because I didn't know what else to do. My hands moved on autopilot. I kept waiting for her to bring it up, to acknowledge it, but she didn't. She chatted about the leftover cake, the playlist, whether we should save the balloons for next weekend. When we finally went inside, I asked her outright, "Why were you with him all night?" She blinked at me, like the question surprised her. "What are you talking about?" "You know what I'm talking about," I said. I tried to keep my tone calm, but it came out rougher than I meant. "He's just a friend," she said. "You're reading too much into it." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to let it go, to convince myself that she was right. But something in the way she avoided my eyes told me I wasn't imagining things. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to her breathing next to me, steady and unbothered. My own heart felt too fast, like it didn't belong in my chest anymore. Before dawn, I got up and went out to the garage. I sat in the driver's seat of my truck and stared at the dashboard until the sky began to lighten. That was when the thought first came to me, clear as a bell. This isn't going away on its own. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew pretending wasn't an option anymore. The morning after the party, Jenna made pancakes. She acted like nothing had happened, like we were still us. She put the stack in front of me, humming to herself as she cleaned up the kitchen. I stared at the plate, unable to bring myself to pick up the fork. She didn't notice. Or maybe she was pretending not to. She kept talking about the upcoming week, her sister's birthday, a book sale at the library, the beach trip she thought we should plan. I answered in single words. The more she filled the air, the less I trusted any of it. That Monday, I came home to find candles burning on the kitchen counter and chicken marsala on the stove. She turned around with a bright smile. I thought we could have a little date night. I nodded. I couldn't remember the last time she'd tried this hard to be affectionate. It didn't feel comforting. It felt like she was trying to fix a crack she refused to name. We ate in near silence. She kept searching my face for signs that I was softening, that I would let it go. I didn't give her the satisfaction. After dinner, I went to the garage and sat in my truck again. My phone buzzed with her texts. Where did you go? Come back inside. I ignored them. That's when I started writing. I bought a small leather notebook the next morning. When she asked what it was for, I told her it was to jot down client estimates. She believed me. Every night, I filled a page or two with thoughts I couldn't say out loud. I wrote down questions I knew she'd never answer honestly. When did I stop being enough? Did you ever plan to tell me? Would you have chosen me if you weren't caught? Some nights, I just wrote a single sentence. I don't recognize you anymore. During the day, she kept up her performance. She left notes on the fridge reminding me to pick up milk. She sent me links to vacation rentals in Santa Barbara, beach houses with hot tubs and ocean views. She kissed my cheek before she left for work. She tried to smile like nothing had shifted, but it had. One evening, I came home early and found her on the phone. Her back was to me, but the tone in her voice stopped me cold. I couldn't hear everything she said, but I heard enough. I know. No, he doesn't suspect anything. We just have to be careful. I didn't make a sound. I backed out of the house and sat in my truck until she hung up. When she finally came outside, she jumped, like she'd forgotten I existed. You scared me, she said, forcing a laugh. I didn't respond. I started the engine and drove around town until it was dark. That weekend, she acted like she'd been waiting for me to get over it. She handed me her phone with the rental listing pulled up. Can we just book this? We need something to look forward to. I looked at the screen without really seeing it. Why are you doing this? She blinked, thrown by my bluntness. Doing what? Pretending. She set her jaw, her eyes hardening for the first time. I'm not pretending. I'm trying to save this. I didn't argue. There was no point. On Sunday morning, I left before she woke up and drove to a used motorcycle lot outside the city. I'd never owned a bike. I hadn't even thought about it until that week. But standing there among rows of old Triumphs and Harleys, I felt a pull I couldn't explain. I picked a black Triumph. A little beat up, but it ran fine. The seller raised an eyebrow when I didn't haggle. I didn't care. I just wanted something that was mine. When I rolled it into the driveway that afternoon, Jenna came outside, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She stared at the bike for a long time. Is that yours? It is. Since when are you into motorcycles? I shrugged. Since now. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked like she wanted to say something more, but instead she turned and went back inside. That was the moment I knew she understood something had changed in me. I wasn't going to chase her anymore. I wasn't going to beg. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. She tried to be cheerful. She sent me texts during the day. Dinner tonight? Thinking of you. Love you. I replied when I felt like it. Usually I didn't. At night I worked on the bike. I learned how to change the oil, check the brakes, adjust the clutch. I liked the feel of grease on my hands. I liked that she didn't come into the garage to interrupt me. Some nights, she stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching me without speaking. I never invited her in. One night, she finally broke the silence. You could have told me you were going to spend our savings on that thing. I didn't look up from what I was doing. I needed something that wasn't about you. You think this is easy for me? She snapped. You think I don't feel like everything is falling apart? I set my wrench down. Then maybe you shouldn't have made the choices you did. Her eyes flashed. She opened her mouth like she was about to fight back. Then she pressed her lips together and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. In the weeks that followed, she kept up the charade. She invited neighbors over for a barbecue, trying to prove to everyone, and maybe to herself, that we were still fine. She decorated the patio with lanterns and fresh flowers. She ordered catering to take the pressure off me. I didn't say no. I didn't argue. But the night before the party, I slept in the guest room. That was how it was going to be now. Two people sharing a house, pretending the cracks were temporary. She couldn't see that the damage was permanent. And I was done pretending otherwise. The day of the second party, I woke up before dawn. I didn't feel excited. I didn't feel much of anything. Jenna was already up, moving through the kitchen, trying too hard to act like this was normal. She kept her voice bright when she spoke to me, like if she pretended long enough, the truth would dissolve. Just a few friends, she said. Nothing over the top. I nodded without answering. By evening, our backyard was crowded again. People who barely knew us mingled over paper plates and cheap wine. I stood off to the side, watching them pretend to celebrate a birthday I didn't even want. I kept scanning the crowd, half waiting to see if he'd come. I told myself maybe he wouldn't dare show up again. But when I turned toward the side fence, there he was, Kurt, leaning back like he had every right to be there. He spotted me and lifted his glass. "Birthday boy," he called. The guests turned to look. I felt their eyes land on me, curious, measuring. Kurt walked over without hesitation, all ease and confidence. "Didn't know if I'd be welcome," he said, setting his drink on the grill. But Jenna insisted. Of course she did. I nodded just enough to acknowledge him. No more. Kurt looked around, taking in the decorations. "Nice setup," he said. Then he gestured toward the driveway. "That your Triumph?" "Yeah." He grinned. "Man after my own heart. I used to ride." I didn't bother replying. He kept talking anyway, as if nothing was wrong. People drifted past us, pretending not to listen but glancing over their shoulders. Even they could feel something was off. Jenna emerged carrying a cake, smiling too hard, her eyes scanning the crowd for approval. "Make a wish," someone called. I closed my eyes and wished for the night to end. When I opened them, Kurt was behind her again, one hand resting on her shoulder. It wasn't the touch of a casual friend. It was practiced, familiar. I felt a slow burn rise in my chest. A neighbor's wife leaned in to hand me a plate. Her voice was low. "Is that the guy from the first party?" I didn't answer. Jenna started moving around, offering slices of cake. She never looked directly at me. Kurt kept close to her side. Watching them move together felt like watching someone occupy a life that used to be mine. People started to slip away as the night wore on. The conversations thinned out. The laughter died down. A few guests said polite goodbyes. But Jenna and Kurt didn't leave the patio. They stood close together, talking in low voices. I pretended to tidy up empty glasses so I could stay close enough to hear them. She said, "He's barely looked at me all night." Kurt replied, "What did you expect? You can't keep pretending forever." Her voice dropped even lower. "I don't know what to do." "Then maybe you should pick a side." That was all I needed to hear. I walked inside to set the dishes in the sink. My hands were shaking. I thought about grabbing my keys and leaving right then. But I knew if I did, she'd spin her own story. That I'd overreacted. That I'd been unreasonable. When I stepped back outside, they were gone. Panic hit me fast. I scanned the yard. Empty chairs, the fire pit dying down. A few neighbors still chatting in corners. But no sign of Jenna or Kurt. Marcus, my oldest friend, appeared at my side. "You good?" he asked. I didn't answer. I was already moving. I checked the side gate, the garage, the front porch. Nothing. Then I noticed the hallway light shining under the guest bathroom door. I stopped. My hand hovered over the knob. I already knew what I'd find, but I had to see it. I knocked once. A pause. Her voice came, too smooth. 1 second. My chest felt tight. I knocked again, harder. "Jenna." Silence. I tried the knob. Locked. From inside, I heard a shuffle. A breath that sounded too close. Rage flooded me. I pounded the door with the flat of my hand. "Open it." When it cracked open, I saw her first. Flushed, hair mussed, eyes wide. She stepped out as if she could block my view. Kurt was behind her, adjusting his shirt. For a second, none of us spoke. Then she tried to reach for me. "Tom, I stepped past her and grabbed Kurt by the front of his shirt. I slammed him against the wall so hard the picture frame beside his head fell to the floor. "You think I'm blind?" I demanded. "You come into my house and do this?" Kurt's hands went up. "It's not what you think." I pressed harder. "You sure about that?" Jenna's voice was thin. "Tom, please." I turned to her. "When were you going to tell me? Before or after you packed his bags?" Her lip trembled. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "No," I said. "It never is." A couple of guests had gathered in the hallway, watching. Nobody stepped forward to stop me. Kurt tried to twist free. "Let me go." I shoved him back once more for good measure and released him. He straightened his collar, avoiding my eyes. I turned to Jenna, who looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. "You made your choice," I said. "Now I'm making mine." I walked out past the stunned faces. Through the yard, past the half-finished drinks and crumpled napkins. I didn't look back. When I reached the driveway, I swung my leg over the Triumph. My hands were still shaking as I pulled the helmet on. Jenna appeared in the doorway, tears streaking her face. She didn't come any closer. I started the engine. The roar filled the quiet neighborhood. I let it idle long enough for everyone to understand this was over. Then I pulled away, leaving her and Kurt standing in the wreckage they'd made. I didn't feel relief yet, just certainty. And sometimes that's enough. I didn't drive far that night, just far enough to be sure I wouldn't turn around. 20 miles out of San Diego, I pulled into a roadside motel. A blinking vacancy sign buzzed overhead. I shut off the bike, swung my leg over, and felt the adrenaline finally start to drain out of my body. Inside, the man at the front desk didn't ask questions. He took my ID, ran my card, and handed over a key. I didn't bother looking at the room number. It didn't matter. I sat on the edge of the bed, helmet still in my hands. My phone vibrated over and over in my pocket. I knew without checking it was her. Texts, calls, voicemails. I turned it off. For a long time, I didn't do anything. Didn't shower, didn't lie down. Just sat there and tried to remember when I'd stopped recognizing my life. Maybe it was gradual, like a stain spreading so slowly you only notice when it's everywhere. At some point, exhaustion won out. I lay back on the stiff mattress, still wearing my jeans. I stared at the cracked ceiling until I fell asleep. When I woke up, the world looked exactly the same. The only difference was that I no longer felt any need to pretend. I turned the phone back on, bracing myself. The notifications flooded in. Missed calls. Dozens of messages. I scrolled past them without opening any. Then one caught my eye, her last text. "Are you okay? Please tell me you're okay." I didn't want her worrying about whether I'd crashed or disappeared. Even if I didn't know her comfort, I owed myself closure. I typed one word. Alive. I hit send, powered the phone off again, and set it on the nightstand. I spent the day riding along the coast, stopping when I felt like it. No plan, no schedule, just motion. It was the first time in months I felt in control of anything. Late that evening, I went back to the house. I didn't know why. Maybe to see if it still felt like mine. Maybe to see if she'd bother to say what she hadn't before. Her car was in the driveway. All the lights were on. I left the bike running and stood there for a minute, studying the place we'd built together. The lawn I'd landscaped, the front steps I'd repaired, the porch light I'd replaced when it kept shorting out. None of it looked different. That somehow made it worse. When I finally cut the engine, I heard the door open. She stood there watching me. No words, no tears. Just that look. Like she didn't know what to say that would matter anymore. I walked past her into the living room. The table was covered in takeout containers and 2 glasses of wine, as if she'd hoped I'd come home in time to pretend we were still normal. "Tom," she started, her voice low. I held up a hand. "Don't. Not yet." She closed her mouth. I took the envelope out of my jacket and set it on the table. Divorce papers. I'd had them drawn up months earlier, back when I first felt the distance growing. I'd kept them in a locked drawer, thinking maybe I'd never need them. Now, it felt like the only honest thing left to do. She didn't touch the envelope. She just stared at it like it might disappear if she looked away long enough. "I never wanted this," she whispered. I believed her, but that didn't change anything. "You made your choices," I said. "I'm making mine." She pressed her fingers to her mouth, like she was trying to keep something inside. Maybe an apology. Maybe another excuse. I didn't care which. "You don't have to decide right now," I said. "But you will." Her eyes closed. A tear slipped down her cheek. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The house was so quiet I could hear the tick of the wall clock. I looked around, taking in every corner of the life we'd built. I didn't feel the same ache I'd felt the night I left. Just a dull acceptance that it was over. She finally opened her eyes. "Where are you going?" "Anywhere but here." She took a step toward me, then stopped herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded. I didn't have the energy to say I knew. I picked up my helmet, walked back to the door, and paused. I thought maybe I'd feel a pull to stay, to try to fix what was left. But there was nothing. As I stepped outside, I heard her start to cry. The sound was soft and unsteady. I didn't look back. I climbed onto the bike and started the engine. For a few seconds, I let it idle. I knew she could hear it. I wanted her to. I wanted her to understand this was real. Then I pulled away for the last time. I didn't know where I was going, but wherever it was, I'd get there alone. I kept riding, out of the neighborhood, past the quiet blocks and gas stations, past the stretch of coastal highway that had always felt like an escape route. It was late enough that most of the world was asleep. My head was buzzing, but not with anger, just with the understanding that nothing was going back to the way it was. A few miles outside town, I pulled into a rest area. I sat on the bike with my helmet resting on the tank, listening to the cooling engine. I knew she was probably sitting in the living room, still staring at the envelope. Maybe she'd call her sister or her mother, searching for the words that would make her look like less of a villain. But I didn't care what story she'd tell anyone. I'd seen the truth up close. After a while, I turned my phone back on. More messages, more voicemails. The last text from Jenna was just 2 words. "Please call." I didn't. Instead, I sent a message to Marcus. "I'm okay. Thanks for being there." His reply came fast. "Whatever you need. You're not alone." Reading that, I felt something loosen in my chest. I'd spent so long thinking this marriage was the center of everything. But maybe it was just the thing I'd been hiding behind. The road was empty when I pulled back onto the highway. I didn't rush. I kept the speed steady, the engine humming beneath me. With every mile, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. I stopped at a diner around dawn, the kind of place that never closes, where truckers sit nursing black coffee in chipped mugs. I took a booth by the window. I ordered eggs I didn't really want and let them go cold while I watched the sky lighten. For the first time in years, there was no one expecting me home. No one waiting to measure my moods, no one to pretend for. Felt like relief. When the sun was all the way up, I pulled the divorce papers out of my jacket and laid them flat on the table. I ran my thumb along the edge of the envelope. It struck me how something so simple could carry the end of a decade. I thought about all the times we'd been happy. The first apartment, cheap and tiny but ours. The weekend road trips. The nights we'd fallen asleep on the couch with the TV still on. I didn't doubt we'd loved each other once. But love doesn't survive without respect. And somewhere along the way, she'd stopped offering that. I finished my coffee, left a tip, and walked back out to the Triumph. The ride back into town was calm. No urgency, no dread. Just the quiet acceptance that I wasn't the same man who'd stood in that yard trying to convince himself it was all in his head. When I reached the house, I didn't turn into the driveway. I kept going. I passed the street where we used to walk the dog, the corner store where she always made me stop for ice cream, the park where we'd sat on a bench and talked about having kids. I didn't slow down. A few miles later, I pulled over near the courthouse. I turned off the engine and looked up at the building. It felt fitting to end it here, not in our living room, not in another argument, but in a place meant for decisions. I went inside and filed the paperwork. The clerk didn't look surprised. She just stamped the forms and handed me my copy. It was done. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. I took a deep breath and let it out slow. I didn't call Jenna to tell her. She'd get the notification soon enough. When I climbed back on the bike, I felt clear. Not happy yet, but clear. I started riding again with no plan except to keep going until the road ran out. Hours later, I stopped in a small coastal town I'd never been to. I found a cheap motel and paid for a week in cash. That night, I lay on the narrow bed, listening to the ocean through the thin walls. I thought about what I'd lost, but more importantly, what I'd regained. The right to my own peace. The knowledge that I hadn't betrayed myself just to keep a version of love that no longer existed. I turned my phone on long enough to send Jenna one final message. I hope you find what you're looking for. Goodbye. No reply came. I powered the phone off again, slid it into the drawer, and left it there. Outside, the sky was starting to lighten again. I pulled on my jacket and walked down to the water. The sand was cold under my boots, the waves steady and calm. For the first time in months, my thoughts weren't racing. They were quiet, like they'd been waiting for me to step away from the wreckage. I stood there until the sun came up. I didn't feel broken. I felt awake, and that was enough.